Allow me to welcome you to this very momentous occasion, the launch of the Directors Week in Africa under the theme, The Need for Good Governance, for Good Corporate Governance and Leadership on the African Continent. If I may introduce myself, my name is Susan Mtanganura. I am the past chairperson of the Institute of Directors Zimbabwe, and I will have the privilege of talking you through today's exciting program of events. Before we get into the meat of our program today, please allow me to call upon Reverend Mrs. Angela Carmen Appler to give us an opening prayer. Mrs. Appler, if you would please.
Shall we pray? Our Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for your faithfulness. We thank you for your great grace that has brought us this far. We ask that even as we have come to deliberate on issues concerning governance, you will grant us the grace to appreciate your leadership as master, architect, planner, creator, and sustainer of our universe, and of all things visible and invisible. And we ask that you teach us to have one mind, one heart, one voice to progress the agenda of sound governance in our continent. Amen.
Thank you very much for that opening prayer. And if I might just note that Reverend Mrs. Angela Carmen Appler is with the Institute of Directors Ghana. She is the Vice President of the Institute. Just in case, a little bit of housekeeping, please note that we do have IT support on the platform. So if you have any difficulties, please just put a note in the chat box and you will get the necessary assistance. Moving further into our program, please allow me to call upon the chairperson of the Africa Corporate Governance Network Chairs Forum, Mr. Roxon Dogba, who is also the president of the Institute of Directors Ghana. Let me just add that this is a gentleman who has contributed significantly to the establishment of the ACGN Chairs Forum. He has shown great passion and interest for corporate governance on the continent, recognizing that corporate governance and leadership are key ingredients for the growth and success of our continent. He has done great work to bring together various countries and various chairs across the continent. So Mr. Roxon Dogba, if you would please give us a welcome address. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice President Susan, our moderator for today. Our special guest of honor, Professor Mervyn King, our other special guests, present and past chairs of IODs on the continent, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to all of you. I welcome you to the launch of the institutionalization of the African Corporate Governance Week under the auspices of the African Corporate Governance Network Chairs Forum. The African Corporate Governance Network is a collaborative network of director membership organizations that was formed in 2013 to promote effective corporate governance on the African continent. The network has 19 member countries and 9 affiliate members representing over 20,500 senior executives and directors across the continent. The mission of the ACGN is to develop the institutional capacity of its members for the enhancement of effective corporate governance practices towards building better private and public sector organizations, as well as corporate citizens in Africa. The ACGN Chairs Forum was created to promote the following objectives: To create the appropriate synergy among chairmen and presidents of corporate governance institutions of African Corporate Governance Network to pursue the growth and development of ACGN and corporate governance in Africa. 2, to provide strategic guidance on the governance of ACGN. 3, to facilitate high-level stakeholder engagement in member countries. 4, to provide a learning platform for chairmen and president. 5, to provide a peer review mechanism. And 6, to share ideas and best practice. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the institution of the African Corporate Governance Week is therefore in furtherance to these objectives. As we are all aware, corporate governance involves the structures and processes for the direction and control of businesses. Although I may be preaching to the choir, the benefits of good corporate governance cannot be overemphasized. Effective governance practices help businesses operate more efficiently, strengthen investor confidence, and therefore attract capital, and improves relationship with stakeholders. We can all agree that this is what our continent needs. It's in this spirit that the Chairs Forum of the African Corporate Governance Network wishes to institutionalize the celebration of the Directors' Week in Africa. To stimulate the culture of good corporate governance and leadership in Africa. To discuss corporate governance issues and implications on strategic projects in Africa. To discuss and develop strategic interventions for corporate governance failures. To enhance capacity of directors and networking with global and continental stakeholders in the governance and leadership landscape. And to stimulate sustained interest and attention of political leadership in corporate governance on the continent, and promote interaction and strategic relationships. And finally, to recognize and celebrate promoters and achievers of good corporate governance outcomes on the African continent. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, following the adoption of the formation of the Chairs Forum of the African Corporate Governance Network in August 2021, we have had several strategic engagements, including the discussion of the African Corporate Governance Guidelines being championed by the African Peer Review Mechanism, APRM, under the auspices of the African Union. We have also organized 3 international knowledge sharing sessions, which was attended by a total of over 600 corporate governance practitioners from several parts of the continent. This morning, I present to you the key fallouts from the stakeholder engagement with some recommendations in the hope that we will take actions on them in our various countries to further enhance the practice of good corporate governance. To promote good corporate governance at the various country levels, the following observations and recommendations were made. 1, political leadership and stakeholder institutions in most African countries are not utilizing the membership of corporate governance professional institutions strategically. It is recommended that stakeholders must patronize the services of corporate governance institutions to enhance service delivery in their countries, whilst the various corporate governance institutions must create a substantial budget for effective media and stakeholder engagement. 2, most state-owned enterprises are underperforming due to poor board selection and recruitment strategies. Membership of boards are usually politicized and used as compensation for political party faithfuls and for friends. There is a need to move away from this practice. 3, governance institutions and stakeholders, including the media, must aggressively advocate that only qualified directors are appointed onto boards to ensure organizational objectives are achieved. 4, governance institutions must also ensure that there is the availability of a pool of trained directors to choose from for these board appointments. 5, corporate governance institutions must develop a strategic working relationship with the political leadership in their various countries to enhance good corporate governance cultures. Ethical and effective leadership of boards of most companies on the continent is not very strong. There is a need to promote ethical and effective leadership through the introduction of enforceable national codes of ethics. There is insufficient appetite for local executive level board training. A conscious effort is needed to stimulate patronage of such executive board level training and attendance. 8, there is no minimum standard for corporate governance training, necessitating the need to have a continental framework for good corporate governance training, and also guidelines to serve as reference for country-specific governance codes. As a continent, there is also the need to have a standardized African board training manuals that are benchmarked to global standards to ensure balance of knowledge and skill set across the continent. 9, there are no established IODs and corporate governance institutions in some parts of the continent. This is a major challenge to our quest to have corporate governance institutions replicated on the continent to support the local economy and political governance. 10, the need to establish continental recognition schemes to promote and deepen good corporate governance outcomes cannot be overemphasized. 11, there is not enough effort to monitor and celebrate the success of corporate organizations and individuals promoting and exhibiting good corporate governance outcomes. In view of these, the ACGN Chairs Forum has adopted an Excellence Award scheme in corporate governance, and this will be launched in February 2022. 12, there is a lack of appreciation of directorship as a profession. Deliberate effort must therefore be made by corporate governance institutions in Africa to ensure this is adequately addressed. 13, there's no African code for corporate governance guidelines at the continental level. ACGN therefore applauds the African peer review mechanism for the initiative of developing a guideline, which is currently undergoing stakeholder consultations. 14, where the code exists, there are no guidelines on enforcing it as it is not supported by any legislation. Leadership of governance institutions and stakeholders must promote the use of governance codes and organize periodic annual review sessions of the codes for feedback to create room for improvement. Further, they should push for upgrading of the code into law. 15, all stakeholders, including corporate governance institutions in Africa, are to promote the integrated thinking and reporting culture in the African continent through education, advocacy, and the formation of committees to enhance value creation and good governance outcomes. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I will now share some highlights of the achievements of the forum to stimulate support whilst we make all efforts to reposition the ACGN as a very vibrant organization. 1, a strategic plan has been developed and launched. We will need a lot of funding support to implement the strategies. 2, a framework for the establishment of corporate governance institutions in countries that do not have corporate governance institutions has been developed and adopted. Discussions are presently ongoing to establish a corporate governance institute in Liberia. 3, a recognition award scheme has also been developed and adopted for implementation, and this will be launched in February 2022. The maiden edition of the ACGN Excellence Awards will be held as part of the Directors' Week celebration in Africa in November 2022. 4, a knowledge hub has been established to enhance research and knowledge sharing, also to enhance policy development and related issues. 3 successful engagements have been held so far. 5, we have made major contributions into the review of the African Corporate Governance Guideline developed by the APRM. 6, we are currently developing a mentorship scheme for institutional and individual mentoring on corporate governance on the continent. 7, We are also developing a framework to support director placement and training across countries on the continent. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, for African countries to reap the benefits of effective corporate governance, there is the need to strengthen the enforcement mechanisms of regulatory institutions. Also, there is a need to review existing legislation on corporate governance to ensure that the provisions are in line with the prevailing societal challenges, as well as being in line with international best practices and standards. It's also very critical for Africa to adopt the culture of implementation as a key imperative on the continent to reverse the current trend where a lot of policies are developed without any strong commitment towards implementation. It should be our collective goal to ensure the promotion of good corporate governance outcomes on the continent is sustained. We are blessed to have our senior brother, Professor Mervyn, one of the global icons in corporate governance, to speak to us this morning on the need to promote good corporate governance on the continent and also launch the institutionalization of the Directors' Week celebration on the African continent. And we are also blessed to have the representative of the Director General of the African Continental Free Trade Area, AFCFTA, to give us some updates on the progress being made. We are hopeful that we will build a strong relationship with the AFCFTA Secretariat for us to provide the appropriate corporate governance infrastructure to support the inter-Africa trade agenda. We look forward to your support in marketing the celebration of the Directors' Week in all countries in Africa. I wish us all a successful lunch. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President Dogma, for those welcome remarks. Aptly putting into context the role of the Chairs Forum under the Africa Corporate Governance Network, and also setting the backdrop for the launch of the Directors' Week in Africa. Thank you for sharing the excellent work that has been done to date, and also just sharing with us the objectives of the Chairs Forum. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, and noting that the Chairs Forum is a collaboration of various institutes of directors across the continent, I would like now to call upon representatives of some of the Institute of Directors in Africa to give their solidarity messages. If you would allow me to start with Mike Eric Juru, who is the president of the Institute of Directors Zimbabwe, and also the current vice chairperson of the Africa Corporate Governance Network Chairs Forum, to give his solidarity message. Over to you, Mr. Juru.
Thank you. Thank you, Susan, our convener, and thank you to our chair for the opening remarks. Allow me to recognize the presence of our guest of honor, Professor Mervyn, the EU representatives, directors of commerce and industry, the Secretary General of Afcfta, respective members of IOD in Ghana, Kenya, Lesotho, Namibia, South Africa, Uganda, UK, and all governance practitioners here present. Good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, wherever you are. First and foremost, warm greetings from Zimbabwe and assurances of unwavering support as we launch the Directors' Week in Africa to promote and institutionalize corporate governance, good governance, and ethical leadership. It is my pleasure to be among you this day as we learn more and acknowledge, as well as appreciate our services as men and women of valor who have and are working tirelessly to uphold the Institute of Directors' ethos in our day-to-day operations, ensuring sustainability of the economies of our countries without compromising. We are aiming at building capacity, networking, and sharing ideas on how to promote directorship and professionalism in our various spheres of influence. We are persevering during an unprecedented pandemic as we work in uncertain, trying times with unforeseen economic downturns, social unrests, emerging issues such as the lockdowns, social distancing, the sanitization, and wearing masks, all in the interest of our safety. It is befitting that a conscious decision was made to launch the Directors Week celebrations in Africa, as we believe effective corporate leaders stand on a foundation of solid governance principles to build enduring enterprises. On behalf of my country, I applaud and salute ACGN Chairs Forum for taking the leading role in initiating the launch, as this builds the impetus for IODs in Africa to unite and institutionalize good corporate governance in public and private enterprises for the sustainability of the continent. Due to this painstaking work, I've got the honor to applaud all continents world over, Africa included, that have and are embracing good corporate governance. Further, we are sharing the principles and values that enhance good corporate governance outcomes as we look forward to the continued collaboration, as we need each other for us to leave a legacy of accountability. Initiatives have been made in Zimbabwe, which include, but not limited to these. We annually have our Director of Excellence Awards. We formulated our code on corporate governance. We independently place non-executive directors and continuously train, develop directors, as they are critical components in the governance ecosystem. Zimbabwe has set up committees to address integrated reporting, dedicating a week to recognize and celebrate directors is a noble initiative, which we as Zimbabwe fully embrace and pledge our support. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, long live to Africa Corporate Governance Network, long live to the ACGN Chairs Forum, long live to IODs in Africa and the world over. I thank you for your attention. Have a pleasant day.
Thank you very much, Dr. Juru, for honoring the time and sticking to your 3 minutes and for that excellent solidarity message. I will now call upon Jackie Muka, the Vice Chairperson of the Institute of Directors Kenya, to share the message from Kenya. Thank you.
Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever, as my Dr. Juru mentioned. To the Chairperson of the Chairs Forum, Mr. Roxon Dogbega, Vice Chairman, our Chief Guest, Professor King, representatives of Institutes of Directors, representatives of the African Continental Free Trade Area, attending directors, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, all protocols observed. It is my pleasure to join you for the launch of Directors Week in Africa on behalf of Dr. Nelson Kuria, the Chairperson of the Institute of Directors Kenya, who unfortunately could not be here with us today. He, however, sends his warm greetings, as do I, from Kenya to you all. As mentioned, my name is Jackie Muka, and I'm the Vice Chair of IOD Kenya. We are gathered here today under the aegis of the ACGN, which is mandated to provide a forum for policymakers and market participants to exchange experiences, best practices, with the aim of addressing corporate governance challenges in Africa. This is a platform to which we fully subscribe. We certainly therefore stand in solidarity with you and extend our hearty congratulations for the launch of Directors Week in Africa. We all know that the top of the corporate ladder has its challenges and can at times feel lonely and fraught with the pressures of everybody looking up to one for all the answers. The chance to network and share experiences among peers is not always at hand. So this Directors Week is therefore a wonderful opportunity to bring policymakers together to converse and strengthen the building blocks for good corporate governance across our continent. This week's theme, the need for good corporate governance and leadership on the African continent, calls on us to always bear in mind what our focus should be when we take up corporate leadership roles. As we spend the week delving into the tenets of good corporate governance and leadership, exploring ways our interventions can help improve all the issues that we handle, business performance, how it can help improve, build stability and productivity, how it can unlock new opportunities, reduce risks, enable faster and safer growth, build morale, reputation, and legacy. We must recall that interactions across the continent are poised for takeoff with the founding of the African Continental Free Trade Area. Excellence and uniformity in good corporate governance practice will certainly serve in boosting intra-African trade across the continent. Too often, Africa is seen as lagging behind in many metrics, and really that should not be. It is our hope that issues like ethics, diversity, inclusion, environmental concerns, and going beyond the profit motive and into a social context will be thoroughly canvassed as we discuss. We wish this forum successful deliberations over the coming week. That is the end of our message to you.
Thank you very much, Jackie, for that very encouraging and inspiring solidarity message, and indeed highlighting the challenges that Africa faces, but also the fact that these are not insurmountable. I now call upon from Senegal, Mr. Mama Fall, who is the permanent secretary and member founder of the Institute Senegalese d'Administrateurs, for your solidarity message, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, distinguished Professor King, dear Chair, sisters and brothers. On behalf of Senegalese Institute of Directors, the French name is Institut Sénégalais des Administrateurs. I want to say a big thanks to all our friends, chair and members of ACGN, for the forum that they have animated over the past month, and for the great initiative of launching the Week of Director in Africa. ISA was created both by public and private sector in Senegal, and we think that we must strengthen and promote good corporate governance. Good governance in our countries and governance of our companies, which are the focus of wealth creation in all our economies. This is key in our point of view for the development of each of our country, of our sub-regional economic integrated zones, and also in general for Africa, our motherland. We really support the launch of the Directors Week in Africa, and long live the Directors Week in Africa. That's the few words we wanted to give for this very important event for Africa. Thank you very much.
Short, sweet, and to the point. Thank you so much for highlighting the role of good corporate governance in wealth creation in Africa. Thank you very much. If I might now proceed to call upon from Lesotho, Mr. Mpoyane, who is the chairman of the Institute of Directors, Lesotho. And of course, the challenge for all of us across Africa is just to learn these new dialects and ways of pronouncing different languages. And I will, of course, challenge anybody to pronounce my middle name and surname. So please, please carry on. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Susan. My name is Lejonim Pojwani. Allow me, Mr. Ceremony, to pass my sincere greetings to the guest of honor, Professor Martin Key, the chairman of the African Governance Corporate Governance Network, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. According to John Maxwell, he says, everything rises and falls on leadership. We will all agree that leaders from all levels make decisions every day. And we'll all agree that those decisions shape what we see in Africa now. And they will also shape what we will see in Africa tomorrow. We cannot afford to kick the can down the street any longer. Africa is hungry and urgently hungry for the ethical and professional leadership. Few questions that one has to ask is, who is sitting in the Africa's decision-making authorities at national, corporate, regional, and also continental levels? The second question is, what processes do they follow to make decisions? And thirdly, do governance practitioners actively play a role in shaping those decisions? And if not, why? Occupying a seat in a decision-making authority is a huge privilege that only less than 10% of our communities get. And every decision they make has a huge bearing on the rest of the communities. It is therefore not only important but imperative for the decision-making processes to be guided, informed, and on times to be strictly regulated to protect the interests of African community rather than those of office bearers. Governance technicians and assurance providers are the least prioritized in all regards. However, they are the most critical resources to protect organizations, nations, continents, and the globe at large. Great cities that we see or observe every day, they are supported by strong foundations and effective infrastructure network. The great African forests that we see are as a result of strong roots network underground. Great companies and great global economies that we see are a result of strong governance structures and effective governance processes. If a single large corporate collapses in a certain jurisdiction, not only the shareholders or owners of that company will suffer, but most importantly, the employees, suppliers, tax authorities or national governments, investors, and at times, even neighboring countries. Countless programs are funded and supported by local and international organizations and are failing in the hands of our African countrymen and women. Not because they lack technical skills, but mainly because there are inadequate governance processes to enable effective decision-making and accountability. Advocacy for active engagement and involvement of governance practitioners at all decision-making structures is critical. Hence, I invite all shareholders, investors, customers, suppliers, and community at large to hold each institution accountable for effective and sustainable decision-making processes. I also invite assurance providers to focus more on effectiveness and efficiency of governance processes, from the appointments of those in governance authorities, decision-making processes, oversight processes, and finally accountability processes, as these are the foundations of strong institutions. If they are weak, all other business processes will suffer. Different jurisdictions are at different levels of maturity in good governance, and Lesotho is in its inaugural stage of the establishment of the Institute of Directors, which is an organization responsible for promoting good corporate governance principles and advocating for relevant and appropriate engagement and involvement of qualified governance practitioners to enhance informed and sustainable decisions. Lesotho has also, through the support of the African Development Bank, the African Corporate Governance Network, other professional bodies, the government of Lesotho, and independent governance practitioners have went through a great journey of developing and successfully launching the Lesotho Code of Corporate Governance, named after the great King Mokgweetsi. And the code is called the Mokgweetsi Code, which was launched a few months ago. The sponsors of that project and all that played a role, we thank you very much. This is not an easy journey, but it is the most important. I therefore pledge the Lesotho's or the IOD Lesotho support to the African Corporate Governance Network and the Chairman's Forum and the Directors Week in Africa. I invite you all to collaborate more and to soldier on and put governance and continental, regional, and national agenda. I thank you very much for listening, and I wish you all the best in this great journey.
Thank you, Mr. Mpojane, for indeed highlighting that Africa is in desperate need for ethical and professional leadership and underscoring the role of the governance practitioner in the process. I will now call upon from Zambia, Mr. Edward Kabwe, the President of the Institute of Directors, Zambia, for his solidarity research. Thank you, Mr. Kabwe.
Thank you, convener, chair, guest of honor, Professor Mervyn King. We're always happy to have you in our midst. Past chairs, presidents, attendants, dignitaries, captains of industry. May I ride on the previous protocols noted by the previous speakers to simply say, ladies and gentlemen, it's good to see you today. On behalf of the Institute of Directors of Zambia, where I'm currently president, and I'm delighted to be joined by my past presidents on this forum. Great to have you. We wish to recognize and appreciate this initiative of the launch that we are having today, the launch of the Directors Week celebrations in Africa. We are very much appreciative of this, and we wish to say that corporate governance is a critical input of leadership, both at corporate entity, governance, continental, and global level. Leadership, especially from corporate governance, cannot be tested at critical times, such as this one, when Africa, just like other aspects of the globe, is facing critical survival issues. Survival issues arising from difficulties such as the COVID-19 pandemic, which we are all facing. And you know, during this time, for most of the companies, it is survival. Some of them that go into oblivion don't even come back. Others are barely surviving. But leadership at this point is a key test. And as you know, corporate governance is a key component of leadership, and that cannot be overemphasized. With regard to the launch of this forum, we appreciate from the Institute of Directors of Zambia that Africa is taking up this step. As you well know, the problems in Africa can only be solved by Africans. Yes, we are living in a global world, but first you need to sweep your house first before you look elsewhere. Although you may not need to reinvent the wheel, you borrow the ideas from everywhere, but you have to sweep your house first. So Africa needs to solve the African problems. And what we are doing is a good step. Moving on to our appreciation as Institute of Directors of Zambia of what we are doing, the IOD Zambia continues to move the agenda of corporate governance by ensuring that we be very active on the Africa Corporate Governance Forum, as well as the programs that we deploy in country. Just to share with you briefly that within the country, we have a lot of programs which we are actively moving with the government, private sector, research institutions and academia, small and medium enterprises, consultants. And so we have the wide range of interaction and outreach to what we call our clients. And we don't give a one-size-fits-all approach because we know these entities have different perspectives of corporate governance. But at the end of the day, the tenets of corporate governance are overarching matters of transparency, accountability, responsibility, fairness, ethics, the environment. Those are very key, and we push those agendas items in Zambia. Some specific things that we do, just to give an example in the interest of time, is that we are very particular about our engagement with the government because it's one of the largest consumers of corporate governance ideas. The practical part of it in Zambia is that you may be aware that we just recently had elections in August in Zambia. And I'm delighted to note that the recently elected Republican president, His Excellency Mr. Hakainde Hichilema, is a senior member of the Institute of Directors of Zambia. In his flagging message, immediately he was appointed. The fact that he's a member of Institute of Directors of Zambia was there throughout. And you know, that's the part which every person wants to read. When a new president is elected, they want to see who is this. And the fact that he's a member of the Institute of Directors of Zambia profile there. We were very happy with that. Something of interest that you may wish to know about our engagement with the Republic of Zambia, in addition to private sector, is that just this morning at 11 hours, which is 9 hours GMT, we were making a presentation to an induction workshop of all the ministers and permanent secretaries, and the Institute of Directors of Zambia was invited to make a presentation on the role of state-owned enterprises, on the role of permanent secretaries and ministers in state-owned enterprises. And so we made a 45 minutes presentation. This workshop was opened by the president yesterday. It's ongoing, and our slot was today. This shows our profile of engagement with key stakeholders, just as an example. And that's what we are doing. Not to take up much of your time, Madam Convener, I just wish to indicate that as Zambia, we wish in our solidarity message to indicate our commitment to deploying corporate governance tenets, to interactions with the Africa Corporate Governance Forum, and to new ideas, and to be available as and when we are needed. On behalf of myself, my board of directors of the Institute of Directors of Zambia, my past presidents, all members of the Institute of Directors of Zambia, our stakeholders, we wish the Africa Corporate Governance Forum and this initiative all the best. And in our solidarity message, we wish to bring our full commitment to this initiative and wish you all the best. And please be assured of our continued engagement and our availability. All the best. I thank you and greetings from Zambia.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kabwe, and thank you for sharing the Zambian experience and, of course, the exemplary leadership that is being demonstrated by the newly elected president of Zambia in the governance sphere. I'm sure this will be an inspiration to many. We are running a little bit behind in terms of our time, but I will now carry on to ask from Uganda, Mr. Dison Okumo, the CEO of the Institute of Corporate Governance Uganda, to give us his solidarity message. Thank you.
Hello, we send you greetings from Uganda. Thank you very much for accepting us.
Thank you very much. We warmly accept the greetings from Uganda. Ladies and gentlemen, moving on with our program, we are honored to have in our midst the technical advisor for the Africa Peer Review Mechanism, which is a specialized agency of the African Union, Ms. Tumi Dlamini, to share a solidarity message with us.
Thank you very much, Program Director. Thank you to the Chairperson of the Institute of Directors in Ghana, Mr. Dogbuga, Professor Mervyn King, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the APRM, an organ of the African Union, I'm deeply humbled to be with you today. And it is my great honor on behalf of APRM to extend our sincere congratulations to all the chairpersons who belong to the Chairpersons Forum, as well as to the African Corporate Governance Network for the launch of the Corporate Governance Directors Week. We very much applaud and support the collaborative efforts of the stakeholders from different corners of the continent to come together to highlight the important work of corporate directors, to learn from one another, and to launch this platform for a peer exchange of practices, ideas, and more importantly, to be able to benchmark progress in the area of good corporate governance. We all know, of course, that the improvement of corporate governance in any country, particularly in our developing economies, determines the sustainability of our companies and thereby increases the levels of employment. In the course of our work at APRM, we've conducted several reviews, over 24 in total, to assess levels of compliance with corporate governance standards across the African country. And I must say that whilst at the onset, there was minimal observance with corporate governance standards, we've been greatly encouraged by recent awareness and improvement in promoting good corporate governance within the private sector. And we are also honored to have found that our research shows that whilst there were initially 19 out of 55 member states to have a framework or code of corporate governance, we're now at 21. However, there remains much work to be done, and we're therefore very delighted to see that there is this collaborative work and that there is this initiative by different institutes of directors to recognize the strength in working together and in sharing ideas and the latest trends and developments in this area. In our consultation with several stakeholders, including, of course, members of the ACGN, we have determined that there's an urgent need to both entrench best practices of corporate governance in the world, but at the same time, it's necessary in Africa to adopt a paradigm shift that embraces a corporate governance framework or approach that is truly premised on shared values in Africa, a paradigm shift that suits the needs of the continent as engraved in the African Union Agenda 2063, the Africa we want, and to confirm the fundamental role of business to make a positive contribution to development and be involved in improving the livelihood of local communities. As President Dogeba said earlier on, we've been very honored to work with some of the Institute of Directors in the development of the African principles and guidelines on corporate governance. And we've also had the honor to meet with some of you, and we hope that this work will continue as these African principles take into account not only the best practices in the world, but they remain cognizant and respectful of our particularities in the African business society. We therefore look forward to engaging with you further and to seeing the growth of this forum. Please be assured of the support and continued cooperation and collaboration with the African peer review mechanism and other organs of the African Union. I thank you all very much.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Lamini. It is indeed inspiring, encouraging to have the level of support and commitment from yourselves at the highest level, at the African Union level. Thank you very much. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Chinyere Almona, who is the Director General and Chief Executive Officer for the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry in Nigeria, for his solidarity message. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. And good morning, good afternoon to everyone on this call. And standing on existing protocol, I want to just say, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleasured and honored to be with you today. For me, it's almost a dream come true that the ACGN will have a solid footprint in Africa and do very innovative things in Africa. So I'm the Director General at the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. But then I think my previous role makes the ACGN something that is very dear to my heart. So when I was with the IFC, leading the Africa Corporate Governance Program, we initiated and were engaged in the conversation that birthed the ACGN. And so for me, it's like really great to have the ACGN doing new things all the time. The launch of the Directors Week in Africa and the Chair Forum is a way to, institutionalize the path or the plans of the ACGN. It's a way to get your voice heard across the globe. One thing we've always dreamed for the ACGN is that you make impact, real impact in the lives of Africans. I like the quotes by Confucius that says, in a country well governed, poverty is something to be ashamed of. In a country badly governed, wealth is something to be ashamed of. Really, we want an Africa that is well governed. And we know that corporate leaders are at the forefront of governance that will make Africa not just ashamed of poverty, but we can be ashamed of poverty because we can attract investments. We can attract real investments that will have real social impact in Africa that will help Africa to bloom. We can attract investments that will increase industrialization, can attract investments that will make a viable change in the lives of Africans. And a chairperson, really, when you think about the chair on a board, is responsible for leading the board and focusing on strategic issues. So when you have a group of chairmen or chairpersons who are focused on doing the right thing, who are focused on leading their boards right, then we're almost certain that we'll have an Africa where the corporate world, integrity, transparency, fairness, accountability will be the order of the day, where investors can trust that Africa is productive and Africa is secure in terms of their investment outlay. Interestingly, boards of directors may not appear to be noticed when things are going well, so you take them for granted. But once things start to go sour, everybody begins to point a finger at them. But then we want boards who will not allow things to go sour. Therefore, they will be there and they will add value. Often I get asked questions about how futuristic is this venture, is this initiative? I believe it's very futuristic. I believe that as ACGN, we're looking to the future and we're beginning to visualize what we want for Africa and insisting that that gets done. The future of boards is not in doubt. For years to come, boards will remain relevant in the scheme of things. The challenge is the board of the future remains to be identified. And I believe that every board represented in the ACGN is a board that can stand to be counted in the future. I wish you all well. I wish that the chair forum will be something that I'll look back 5 years from now and say it's still standing strong. Let's not just talk, let's walk the talk and make sure that we remain sustainable in all that we do. I thank you all for listening and I wish you all the best in this new age.
Thank you so much, Dr. Omona, and for this stark reminder that we really must walk the talk, and I think for bringing to the fore that corporate governance is not just a principle or a concept, but should impact the day-to-day lives of our citizenry. Ladies and gentlemen, moving on with our program, we are indeed privileged to speak to us today, just before we get to our special guest of honor, Mrs. Emily Mborondoria, who is the Director of Trade and Services Investment, Intellectual Property Rights and Digital Trade, to speak to us from the, giving us the topic from the African Continental Free Trade Area, looking at the African Continental Free Trade Area as a strategic project for Africa, the journey so far, and the role of corporate governance institutions in Africa. If you will, please, Ms. Mborondoria, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and good evening, good morning, everyone, from wherever you are. Directors, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm speaking to you today on behalf of His Excellency Wamkele Mene, our Secretary General at the Afcfta Secretariat. We are really proud of the work that you have started, and this will be a great journey because of the importance of the issue of corporate governance. I would like to express my appreciation to the Chairs Forum of the ACGN for inviting the Afcfta Secretariat so that we may deliver an address on the topic as mentioned by the moderator, Afcfta as a strategic project for Africa. And that's the journey so far and the role of corporate governance institutions in Africa. From the onset, let me emphasize that the African Continental Free Trade Area, that is the Afcfta, is a very strategic project for Africa's development and its transformation. Among other things, the AFCFTA will improve the ease of doing business in the continent by eliminating tariffs and non-tariff barriers to trade. The AFCFTA has what it takes to deliver on all the development needs of the continent. And maybe at this juncture, let me just take a step back and take stock of the journey to creating a One African market for goods and services that goes back to 2012, when the Assembly of Heads of State and Government of the African Union made a decision to fast-track the establishment of the Continental Free Trade Area, and thus to boost intra-African trade. We all agree that the political will that has been demonstrated by the support of our African leaders in order to create one African market is actually overwhelming. The AFCFTA is one of the projects of the African Union that has received the swiftest and momentous support from the public and private sectors, including civil society, in the history of the African integration process. Following the launch of negotiations in 2012, the agreement establishing the AFCFTA was signed at Kigali, Rwanda on 21st March 2018, and it was signed in Kigali by 44 AU member states. To date, we have 54 out of 55 AU member states that have signed the agreement, and only Eritrea is being awaited to sign the agreement. The AFCFTA agreement entered into force on 30th May 2019, and that is 30 days after the ratification of the 22nd state party, as it's specified in Article 23 of the agreement. So once we had the 22 state parties, and when I talk about state parties instead of member states, you'll understand that once you ratify and you deposit your instruments of ratification, then we call you a state party at the AFCFTA. The AFCFTA agreement to date has 38 AU member states that have deposited their instruments of ratification of the AFCFTA, which means that 69% of AU member states have consented to be legally bound by the AFCFTA agreement. In December 2020, the Assembly of Heads of State and Government of the African Union declared the start of trading under the AFCFTA regime should commence on 1st January 2021, based on legally implementable agreed rules of origin, tariff schedules, and custom declaration. I'm happy to say that on the 1st of January, we did have the launch of the start of trading of the AFCFTA. And so far we have the first consignment under the AFCFTA, and which was between Ghana and South Africa. The products that were traded included alcohol, makeup or beauty products, among other products. However, negotiations on the critical phase 1 negotiations, that is trading goods and trading services, are still ongoing. And the parts that are still ongoing are the issues of rules of origin, tariff schedules, and also commitments under trade in services. However, we can talk about significant progress that has been made in the negotiations. We have now 87.3% of the rules of origin tariff lines that have been concluded and agreed upon and adopted by our Council of Ministers. We have 43 tariff offers that have been submitted by both state and non-state parties, of which 29 have been technically verified and have been submitted for adoption by the Council of Ministers. And then we also have 43 initial services offers. And for those that are aware, in the case of trading services, there are 5 priority services sectors that we are working on, and that is communication, financial services, transport and related services, And we also have tourism and what we call business services. So those are the 5 sectors that we've been working on, and we have 43 initial offers, and the work on verification is ongoing, but we hope that this will be adopted at the next meeting of Council of Ministers that is scheduled for January of next year. Equally important, we have several political and technical institutions that have been established that are charged with the implementation, administration, facilitation, monitoring, and evaluation of the ACFTA legal instruments. So we have committees, we have subcommittees, we also have the Committee of Senior Officials and also the Council of Ministers. So you have at different levels institutions that make sure that the work that we do will eventually get to the heads of states for adoption and later implementation by state parties. We also have what we are calling phase 2 negotiations that are on investment, competition policy, intellectual property rights, digital trade, and also to ensure inclusivity, we are also dealing with issues of women and youth in trade. Work in all these areas have commenced, but it's on different stages. But we do hope that at least by mid or end of next year, we will also finalize these phase 2 negotiations and also start trading or ensuring that we support trading, because if you look at phase 2 negotiations, most of those issues are key for ensuring that we are able to trade under the AFCFTA. What we need to remember, though, is that each of the steps towards any ambitious goal is also an achievement that comes with concomitant benefits. So we need to ensure that we take also the opportunities that have been given to us under the AFCFTA and also achieve the Africa that we want. We need to understand that the AFCFTA is an ambitious project, and at this juncture, it's considered to be the world's largest free trade area since the formation of the World Trade Organization in terms of participating countries. The AFCFTA also aims to bring together all the 55 member states of the African Union, though at different levels of development and with different social, economic, and legal systems, to create one single continental market. Directors, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, let me now turn on to issues of corporate governance, which is really the main topic for discussion today. At the AFCFTA Secretariat, we strongly believe that corporate governance is central to the achievement of the objectives of the AFCFTA. We therefore support all endeavors to implement efficient and good corporate governance in Africa. Good corporate governance brings sustainable businesses and trust with also our investors. It promotes financial viability by creating a long-term investment opportunity for market participants and ensuring that corporates are well run in a manner that earns the confidence of investors. Good corporate governance also ensures that it safeguards against corruption and mismanagement while promoting fundamental values of a market economy in a democratic society. With good corporate governance, resources will be utilized more efficiently, and there'll be better access to capital, quality employment opportunities, and a better chance of developing sustainable and efficient domestic original capital markets. Good corporate governance, my apologies, is a prerequisite for attracting foreign direct investment that can also contribute to sustainable growth and development. We know that investors are ready to pay a substantial premium for good corporate governance in Africa. Good corporate governance can also help African economies that are struggling to attract foreign direct investment, which is one of the fundamental objectives of the AFCFTA. To this end, corporate governance institutions have a big responsibility for creating corporate governance frameworks and stimulating a corporate governance culture that best aligns business conduct to the goals of the AFCFTA. Corporate governance institutions should use their expertise and voice to champion a culture of good corporate governance in Africa within the context of the AFCFTA. As we move towards the implementation of the AFCFTA, it is imperative that each state parties take appropriate measures to develop an effective corporate governance framework within its territory, recognizing that these measures will attract and encourage investment by enhancing investment confidence and improving competitiveness, thus enabling best advantage to be taken of the opportunities granted by its respective market access commitments under the AFCFTA. Corporate governance institutions should play a lead in providing technical assistance to African businesses and AFCFTA state parties in developing and implementing good corporate governance frameworks that are aligned to the objectives of the AFCFTA. Such corporate governance frameworks should be designed to foster efficient, effective, and sustainable corporations that contribute to the welfare of society by creating wealth, generating employment, and providing solutions to the environment and other social challenges. I would like to conclude my address by saying that it is imperative that the corporate governance be implemented across Africa, that the AFCFTA gives confidence to both domestic and foreign investors. It is imperative that we anchor ourselves in the predictability and the transparency of a rules-based system as we imagine into being the Africa that we want. And maybe just to mention here that the AFCFTA provides for us an opportunity to be able to actually achieve the Africa that we want. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for insightful thoughts and remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, inspiring to note that the world's most ambitious project is indeed housed in Africa. And I think this really raises the bar for the level of participation that is required from the African Corporate Governance Network to support the success of this project. We are truly inspired. Thank you so much, Mrs. Mburundoria, for sharing that with us. And in the spirit of inclusiveness, I will invite Mr. Steve Galloway, the president of the Namibia Corporate Governance Institute, to share with us his message of solidarity today.
Thank you very much, Susan. And I realize, colleagues, that I was not on the agenda. So I thank you very much for your inclusiveness and for bringing one of the new kids on the block into the forum. I really would like, on behalf of the Institute of Corporate Governance in Namibia, to thank you sincerely for including us, and a special word of thanks to the chairman, Roxon, for his personal invitation to be part of this. The Institute of Corporate Governance in Namibia has been going since 2016. I can't get the video on. Has been going through from 2016, but it was only 3 months ago that we adopted the Constitution and our strategic plan for the next 3 years. During the time that it was being run by Esha Luanda and Liberta Capera for the last 5 years, and I think most of you have probably met both of them, Esha and Liberta's leadership have taken us to where we are today. And I'm very glad to say that we have been cooperating with the ACGN for some time, and we've in fact hosted one of the conferences here. We've also been very privileged in this run-up to the institutionalization of the Institute of Corporate Governance to have had Professor Mervyn King here several times. I think he likes Namibia, and we certainly like him. And he has really formed our thinking on corporate governance through his King codes. Patrick Chisanga has also been a very valuable visitor and advisor to Namibia in setting up our institutions here. So it really is on the shoulders of giants in corporate governance that we're able to launch our institute. And the timing of the Directors Week could not have been better for us. We really do intend to cascade the best practices through all organizations in Namibia, and we rely very much on our colleagues in Africa to help us in that process. We've also been privileged to have in Namibia people like Raul Koza, and the concepts of Ubuntu came to us when he presented at the World Economic Forum in 2006, the topic, Let Africa Lead. He carried on with African humanism as a compass a few years later. And I think Professor King's Ubuntu inclusion in all of the codes have been in collaboration with people like Raul Koza. So we really are thankful to have been included as a latecomer, and we wish you all the very best and assure you that our cooperation will be at the highest level, and that we really will be very loyal supporters of the Chairman's Forum and of the Directors Week going forward. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, thank you, Steve. Experiences from Namibia. And I was just going to say to you that, you know, this is Africa, and in the spirit of Ubuntu, you're always on the agenda. It may not be written, but you're certainly always on the agenda. It's all about inclusiveness. So thank you very much for stepping up and sharing with us your experiences from Namibia. Ladies and gentlemen, we now come to, I think, the very special moment that we have been anticipating and waiting for. And so much anticipation for this moment that I noticed that already in our chat box, there is already a question for our guest of honor today, Professor Mervyn King. I am humbled, honored, privileged to be able to introduce to you today Professor Mervyn King, who is a senior counsel and former judge of the Supreme Court of South Africa. He is Professor Extraordinaire at the University of South Africa on Corporate Citizenship, Honorary Professor at the Universities of Pretoria and Cape Town, and a visiting professor at Rhodes. Mervyn King is currently a professor at the Wits Business School at the University of Witwatersrand. He has an honorary doctorate of laws from the Universities of Witwatersrand in South Africa and Leeds in the United Kingdom, an honorary doctorate from Deakin University, Melbourne, Australia, and an honorary doctorate in commerce from Stellenbosch University in South Africa. Is Chair Emeritus of the King Committee on Corporate Governance in South Africa, which, as we all know, produced King 1, 2, 3, and King 4, and Chair of the Good Law Foundation. And if I might say at this stage that we await in anticipation for the King 5 report. Professor Mervyn King is Chair Emeritus of the Value Reporting Foundation, Chair Emeritus of the International Integrated Reporting Council in London, and of the Global Reporting Initiative in Amsterdam, and a member of the Private Sector Advisory Group to the World Bank on Corporate Governance. He chaired the United Nations Committee of Eminent Persons on Corporate Governance and Oversight, and was president of the Advertising Standards Authority for 15 years and a member of the ICC Court of Arbitration in Paris for a period of 7 years. Professor Mervyn King is chair of the African Integrated Reporting Council and chair of the Integrated Reporting Committee of South Africa. He has received Lifetime Achievement Awards for promoting quality corporate governance globally from the ACGN, the Asian Center for Corporate Governance, the Indian Institute of Directors, and the Regis Business School. He is a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts and Commerce, honorary fellow of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of England and Wales, of the Institute of Internal Auditors of the United Kingdom, and of the Chartered Institute of Management Accountants of the Certified Public Accountants of Australia, of the Chartered Institute of Public Relations of the United Kingdom, of the Chartered Secretaries and Administrators, and a Chartered Director of South Africa. He is the patron of the Good Governance Academy, currently housed at the Wits Business School in Parktown Ridge, which holds colloquia on critical governance issues and distributes a memorandum to over 2 million members of local and international institutions. Professor Mervyn King has been a chair, director, and chief executive of several companies listed on the London, Luxembourg, and Johannesburg stock exchanges. He has consulted, advised, and spoken on legal, business, advertising, sustainability, and corporate governance issues in over 60 countries, and has received many awards from international bodies around the world, including the World Federation of Stock Exchanges and the International Federation of Accountants. He is the author of 6 books on governance, sustainability, and reporting, the latest being The Healthy Company. He sits as an arbitrator and a mediator internationally. Ladies and gentlemen, we are indeed honored to have Professor Mervyn King as our guest, special guest of honor today, speaking on the need for good corporate governance and leadership in Africa. And of course, we could have chosen no better for him to launch the Directors Week in Africa. Professor Mervyn King, we're indeed honored, and we would ask you to please take the platform. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much for the introduction, and to my brother Roxon, thank you for the invitation. And to all my brothers and sisters on this continent who have spoken before me, I acknowledge you and the institutions you represent in trying to push for better quality governance on our continent. And all protocols observed, I'm delighted to be with you all today. It was in 1992 that I was approached by the Institute of Directors of South Africa to form a committee to try and write a code for governance of our corporations in South Africa as we were going into our new dispensation of democracy, moving from a country of unequal opportunity to a country of equal opportunity. I knew Mr. Nelson Mandela before he went into jail. While he was in jail, I chaired Operation Hunger with his 2 daughters, and we fed about 2.5 million children every day for over 20 years, mostly in the rural areas of South Africa where the true hardship of the apartheid laws were happening. And he came out of jail, and he had a lunch for 12 people. I was honored to be one of the 12. And he acknowledged if it wasn't for, he always called me Judge King, if it wasn't for Judge King, we'd have useless citizens here in South Africa. Because if one doesn't feed a child under the age of 3, their brains atrophy, and they do become useless members of society. So one day he phoned me, and he and I often spoke to each other, and I told him about this approach for me to chair and form a committee to write a code for governance of corporations in South Africa. He said to me, do it, you're the right man. You've got the academic knowledge and you've got the practical experience. Because by that time, I had resigned as a judge of the Supreme Court of South Africa for reasons of conscience. And I had become the chairman and director of companies in London, Europe, and South Africa. So I had not only this academic knowledge of corporate law and accounting principles, but I had a practical knowledge, having done it, being the chairman and chief executive of major companies. And so the question of the need for good corporate governance and leadership in our continent, if one takes away the question, the word corporate, the need for good governance and leadership in our continent, It is the biggest challenge facing our continent. Because if we have got every natural resource. Our demographic profile shows that the people of the future on our continent are going to be young people between the ages of 20 to 35, the majority of people. We are going to be the market of the future on the African continent. And the eyes of developed economies have turned to our continent. And so the first question is, governance, first of all, occurred in regard to governments. And then in the middle of the 19th century, when the concept of the limited liability company became a reality. It's only into the late 20th century that people started thinking about the governance of corporations. Because up to then, we were focused on, unfortunately, the primacy of the shareholder. And the belief of directors was to increase the wealth of shareholders. And success was dependent on three criteria: the increase of profits, the increase of the share price, and the increase of dividends. Well, that was an unfortunate circumstance, because the consequence was the whole of the 20th century was a century of unsustainable development. And by the end of that century, we had learned that we were using natural assets, particularly the corporation, faster than nature was regenerating them. Clearly not a sustainable issue. So the first thing about corporate governance, the governance of corporations, the same as governance parliaments. The president of a country doesn't operate for himself, doesn't operate for the benefit of his cabinet, doesn't operate for self-aggrandizement or enrichment, but has to serve the people of the country. He is a servant of the people of the country. And when it comes to the corporation, this is an entity formed in the middle of the 19th century, when wealthy families started refusing to provide risk capital to an association of persons running a business. And when the business failed, they were still liable to the creditors and the employees. And they started balking against us and saying, we're not going to give this risk capital anymore. And it was Lord Gladstone in the United Kingdom in the middle of the 19th century said, well, why don't we create an artificial, incapacitated company, but give it limited liability. So these wealthy families can provide the risk capital, which is the working capital for the company. But after that, they've got no duty or responsibility to the company. But the consequence or the concomitant of that would be they would be at the back of the queue if the business failed. That first of all, the ranking would be to pay preference creditors, secured creditors, concurrent creditors, and if there was a residual value, then the shareholders would get a piece of that residual value. Well, at the time, there was great opposition to this. Lord Thurlow, a great theologian, said, who are we as mankind? And for the ladies present in those days, it was mankind, not humankind. Who are we as mankind to create a person that has no heart, no mind, no soul, and no conscience, that has no body to be kicked, and has no soul to be damned by the Almighty? Lord Thurlow was correct, because the limited liability company registered in the countries on our continent are created as a legal personality, but they are completely incapacitated. In the middle of the 19th century, when these companies were formed, the governance architecture was the shareholders would appoint the directors. And because of that started this concept that the shareholders are the primary stakeholder. And that ran right through the 20th century with the unfortunate consequence which I've mentioned. And we started thinking about this when we learned by 1983, so it was already in the 20th century, that there was patent environmental degradation on our planet. And who was the main cause of this? It was the limited liability company, the biggest user of natural assets. And they did not care about how the company made its money. They were driven by the Milton Friedman doctrine and the doctrine of the judgments of several Supreme Courts around the world, that the primary stakeholder is the shareholder. And so, as I said, unfortunately, this persisted right through the 20th century into the 21st century. So when I was asked in 1992 to form this committee, and Mr. Mandela urged me to do it, I was a very experienced corporate lawyer and practitioner, being the chairman and director of several companies. I knew that if we came out with a governance code that was familiar with the rest of the world, namely the primacy of the shareholder, it would have been seen in today's malicious Bell Pottinger language as white monopolistic capital and would have been rejected by the majority of my fellow citizens in South Africa. And so I formed a committee which was truly representative of what became known as our Rainbow Nation, but I wittingly steered them away from the dictates of the 20th century on the governance of corporations. And we came out in 1994 with the following formula. We said directors have to learn and understand what the needs, interests, expectations, and concerns are of their major stakeholder groupings. Take all that into account, but then always make a decision in the long-term best interests of the health of the company. Because if you get that right, it's in the long-term best interest of all the stakeholders. And you know the saying, out of Africa, always something new. Why is it that this African, me, I am an African, from the tip of our continent, became known as the global expert on governance? Why did the United Nations ask me to chair their eminent persons group to recalibrate the question of governance and oversight for these world bodies? It wasn't genius on my part. It was the special circumstances in our country and maybe on the whole of our continent that we could not come out with a code that was in line with what was happening in the developed world. We had to develop something new. Out of Africa, always something new. And so we came out with this code with those principles which I've already mentioned to you. And isn't it unbelievable that 2 years ago, the American Roundtable, representing the top 100 companies in the United States, came out with a statement that we can no longer, as directors, focus on the primacy of the shareholder, but we have to take account of the interests of all the stakeholders. The only unfortunate thing is they didn't go on to say, but then make a decision in the long-term best interest of this incapacitated person, of which we, the directors, are the heart, mind, soul, and conscience. So how did this happen? Well, during the 19th century, the latter half of the 19th century, being appointed the guardian of an incapacitated child, for example, the law was well developed turning into the 20th century that the guardian of this incapacitated individual had to do it with good faith, care, skill, and diligence. And those precepts became the duties of directors of these limited liability companies. What was the common denominator? It was incapacity. There is no company on planet Earth in the developed or the developing world that's committed a wrong. By definition, through the incapacity, they are an innocent legal person. The wrath of society should not turn against a company when something goes wrong, but against its corporate leaders, because they are the heart, mind, soul, and conscience of the company. And so corporate governance started. It was first started in 1998, when 1989, I beg your pardon, when Sir Adrian Cadbury came out with, quote, the financial aspects of corporate governance. Notice, only financial aspects. Were companies not using natural assets, human capital? What about all the other resources used in our resource-constrained world, but with increasing populations? So that the Brundtland Commission between 1983 and 1987 were asked a question, which I ask of you: can we have infinite growth on a finite planet? And I pause. So that question can sink in and you can think. The answer is apparently no. We have 7.6 billion people on the planet at the moment. By 2045, 2050, we're going to have another 2 billion people on the planet. We cannot steer our companies, which were created in order to raise capital and create jobs. That's why I always say the limited liability company is the most important citizen in the developed and developing world. We cannot let them carry on as usual. They gotta carry on as unusual. What is that? Well, governance developed with a focus on the primacy of the shareholder, and it laid down rules and regulations. Have a nominations committee, have a remuneration committee, have an audit committee. And we started ticking boxes, and it started becoming a grudge compliance. Meanwhile, at the United Nations, the International Federation of Accountants asked them to arrange a meeting at the United Nations, to which the World Bank, ASCO, the Securities Exchange Commission of America, and various other bodies were present. Chatham House rules. We don't speak about it, but it's become a matter of public knowledge. This was in about 2004, when the IFAC said, and I was able to say, I was then chair of the Global Reporting Initiative, I said, well, it's correct. We are reporting, and I'm sure many of you online will remember, our annual report consisted of the annual financial statements according to the International Accounting Standards Board standards, and a statement by the chairman, and that's what went out. The majority of users found it incomprehensible, and we were clearly not discharging our duty as directors of accountability. And so the discussion proceeded. By this time, the Global Reporting Initiative, we were issuing guidelines for companies how to report on these sustainability factors in a resource-constrained world, became known as environmental, social, and governance issues, ESG issues. And at another meeting at the United Nations, I said, we as directors are now reporting in two silos, the financial report and the sustainability report. No company operates on that basis. The question of its financial capital, its human capital, its natural assets, its relationship with its stakeholders, all these things are integrated 24/7. They're not separated. They are not in silos. And so the concept of integrated thinking and doing an integrated report was developed. And the establishment of the International Integrated Reporting Council of which I became the founding chair, was established at St. James's Palace in London. And what we said was one needs to connect this financial information with the so-called non-financial information, but not in IFRS speak, but in clear, concise, and understandable language, so that users could really understand. Did this company have a business model? And was it incorporating the Sustainable Development Goals, which were issued in 2015, so that this company had longevity? When your pension fund has got to pay out your pension in 20 or 30 years' time, depending how young you are, it's got to make sure to discharge its duty to you as its beneficiaries. The trustees have to make sure they're investing in the equity of a company where its board has applied its collective mind to making decisions that this company will have longevity, that when those shares have to be realized in 30 years' time when you retire, they will still have value. So governance is critically important. Leadership is absolutely important. What are the hallmarks of the great leader? Well, you've got to have intellectual honesty. You've got to cross that Rubicon of integrity. You've got to leave behind past experiences and present needs and realize that you are the conscience and you are acting for this incapacitated person in the company. You've got to act with responsibility. You've got to be seen to be responsible, and the company must be seen to be a responsible corporate citizen. But you as a leader have to lead this. You've got to make sure that, yes, you've got competency, but you've got the capacity to do it. You're not sitting on too many boards, for example. You've got to make sure that your reports are understandable, because that's how we discharge our duty of accountability. By reporting to the company and through the company to all the stakeholders, but in an understandable manner. We've got to make sure that our reports are substance over form, the good with the bad, absolutely transparent. And so let me just conclude by saying this, that leadership requires that the chair, the leader of an organization, whatever he or she is, needs to ensure to go offline and talk to the members of his or her board to make sure you're all singing from the same hymn sheet, that you all realize what are the key value drivers of the company. As FedEx realized that reliability was its critical value driver. If they weren't reliable in delivering parcels and documents, they wouldn't have a successful company. What is the main value driver of your business? And then what are the key performance indicators? What are the key risk indicators? Do we absolutely understand this? Do we absolutely understand the characteristics of our company? Culture, yes. Culture is how we do things around here when no one's watching us. It's almost an internal thing. But from the outside looking in, those external stakeholders see the characteristics of the company. The same as I've got an African culture, but I've got characteristics as an individual. Companies are exactly the same. My experience has taught me, and I share it with you, you've got to develop a business model and a strategy that's acceptable, not only for those who share the tone at the top with you, not only for the tune in the middle management, but for the B to the feet at the bottom, where Generation Z is. We talk about diversity in boards, but the most critical thing on boards today is intergenerational diversity. Millennials and Generation Z don't think like you and I think. They think differently. And we need to bring that on board so we make that collective business judgment call in the best interest of the company. When you get that buy-in to your business model and your strategy, you can get ordinary people to achieve the most extraordinary things. But if you don't get that buy-in, you can have PhDs from the top to the bottom. You will not even achieve ordinary things. And when you have pride that people belong to this company listed on the Ghana Stock Exchange, Roxanne, when they buy into that strategy and that business model, the morale in the company increases. I work for King Limited, listed on the Ghana Stock Exchange. When you get that, morale increases and you have less, virtually no corruption. Peer starts watching peer. So leadership is a critical issue. Quality governance is the critical issue. You've got to be mindful and outcomes-based. Do you have value creation in a sustainable manner? Do you have adequate and effective controls inside your company? Do you have the trust and confidence of the community in which you operate? These are all mindful outcomes-based issues. And brother professor of mine in Nigeria and I wrote a book about the time has come for mindful outcomes-based governance. So when you make that business judgment call, what's the impact on these mindful outcomes of governance? So in conclusion, the world is not what it used to be. As leaders, we have to think of a mindful outcomes basis, the same as reporting has become outcomes-based, from inputs to activities inside a company. The product goes out, it impacts on the three critical dimensions for sustainable development: people, planet, and prosperity. And we have to think likewise. We have a duty to think of those who come after us. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Professor Mervyn King, for your most insightful remarks, putting into proper context and perspective corporate governance and the role of the director as the heart, mind, soul, and conscience of the incapacitated entity. You've shared great insights with us today. I have absolute confidence that each and every one of us will strive to be a better director, because you have challenged us to aspire for quality leadership and quality governance. On that note, Professor Mervyn King, may I kindly ask you to officially launch the Directors Week in Africa?
I do, and it's my absolute pleasure to do so. Thank you very much for asking me to do it. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, great note of appreciation to Professor Mervyn King for launching the Directors Week in Africa. I think the fact that Professor Mervyn King has taken the time to be with us to launch this week is a sign of the level at which the Directors Week has been pegged, and the sign, I think, of the anticipated success of the program. Thank you very much. On that note, allow me to call upon President Roxanne Dogba, the chair of the Chairs Forum, to give his closing remarks and the way forward.
Thank you very, very much, Madam Moderator. I wish to thank all of you for your participation in this event and for that powerful presentation by Professor Mervyn King and all the speakers, including all the goodwill messages that we have received. We had over 274 registrations for participation from Ghana, Kenya, Lesotho, Namibia, New Zealand, Nigeria, Senegal, South Africa, Uganda, United Arab Emirates, United Kingdom, United States, Zambia, Zimbabwe, and Rwanda. Today, the Directors Week celebration has been launched. I have taken note of some key fallouts. The need for ethics, diversity, and sustainability must have our serious attention on the continent. The promotion of good governance in our countries is key to accelerated development. Everything rises and falls on the leadership. Africa is hungry for ethical and effective and professional leadership. Leadership is facing survival in the midst of COVID-19, and hence the need for enhanced ethical and effective leadership at all fronts, including political and corporate governance in Africa. Africa needs to put its house in order. Corporate governance determines sustainability and level of employment. We also have taken note that 21 countries has corporate governance framework from the 53 countries we have on the continent. There's an urgent need to entrench corporate governance in the world, and for that matter, Africa. The need for enhanced sustainable implementation culture on the African continent is critical for accelerated development. We have taken notes of the significant progress being made at the AFCFTA front. And we also have taken note of the fact that good corporate governance promotes viability and safeguards against corruption, effective utilization of resources, and development of sustainable capital markets. Corporate governance institutions must support the implementation of the AFCFTA projects. We have taken note of that very strongly and seriously. Directors have to learn and understand the needs and expectations of stakeholders and make long-term decisions in the interest of all stakeholders. Leaders require intellectual capacity, transparency, accountability, fairness, and integrity. The leaders must ensure that there is good alignment between members of the board and the organization to ensure that the key performance indicators are achieved. And these they can do by ensuring that they sing from the same hymn book. Reporting must be outcomes-based. We want to thank Professor Mervyn King very much and all others once again for that powerful delivery. Now the way forward. We will expect that these, the maiden edition of this event will be celebrated next year in November. And it will be a 4-day event. We will expect participation from political heads, ministers of states, chief executives, board members, and from global players, from the international community, regulators of public and private sector institutions, NGOs, ambassadors, and people from academia. And the speakers will be chosen from all these target groups. We will expect support from all stakeholders in the areas of marketing this event and making sure that we have good patronage of these directors week, which has been launched today moving forward. And of course, it's important to mention that we will need funding support very much to make it successful. After the event, next year, we will issue a communique which will convey the key fallouts to improve the principles and practices of good corporate governance outcomes and directorship on the continent. We look forward to your active participation, including sponsorship of the event and its marketing, as I have already said. Long live ACGN and long live Africa. I thank you all for being part of this historic event and looking forward to seeing you in November 2022. Thank you very much. I wish you well. Thank you.
Thank you, President Dogba, and thank you all, ladies and gentlemen, for spending this time with us. We really appreciate your attendance and wish you the best as we embark on this journey that we have started today, now that the Directors Week in Africa has been formally launched. I thank you.